Good morning, everyone. We're just going to let people come into the room here before we get started. Happy Friday morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Muffin should start running these meetings.
He's being extra cute this morning. I don't know what's going on in his little brain. Buddy.
Okay. BJ, if you want to go ahead, we can probably just get started since we're doing the intros and
Okay. Okay, hi everybody. Welcome back. For those of you who've been in before, welcome to anybody new. Today our webinar is going to be on multiple losses, and we'll cut to that in more detail in a second. But I just want to say, for those of you who are new, again, welcome. These things we try to be pretty, on the mark with 1 hour. And it's really meant. So the first half we'll run through a bunch of slides, and Tom and I will kind of just level set for the day around this big subject. But then the fun part is we cut to questions and comments, and so don't hold back. And just a reminder, this is really, really meant to be a safe and intimate place even. So every question, every thought is welcome within the bounds of, kindness, essentially. But really welcome. This is a place to kind of unspool. It should be a safe place. So we're very glad you're here. But Tom, can you set us up for the morning real quick, buddy?
Sure. Good morning to everyone. I'm Tom Grothy. I'm one of the Mettle counselors, and I am a nurse practitioner and trained as a marriage family therapist. The idea of multiple loss and new ways to cope kind of sprang from my head. And a lot of it, BJ and I have been in conversation about new ways that we might approach this very real and difficult topic. And so what we want to do is present that to you today. Some of what we'll be talking about are some actual bereavement theory, so we can kind of ground multiple loss within existing bereavement theory. But then we want to stretch out, and we want to bring in some new ideas, new philosophies that maybe you're not used to using in relationship to grief and multiple loss. And our goal at the end of today is to stimulate some thought and to give you guys some new tools that you might apply to multiple losses in your life.
Beautiful. Great, Tom. And thanks for being here, buddy. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too.
So, okay, well, let's get Sonia in the mix too. Sons, over to you.
thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. Just wanted to give you a heads up on how to interact with us after Tom and BJ are done going through the slides. So you can either raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can ask your question aloud, or if you prefer not to do that, you can click on the Q&A button and type your question in, and I will read it aloud for Tom and BJ to answer. So again, two ways: you can raise your hand, or you can type it into the Q&A. And to BJ's point about, being a safe space, if you'd like to remain anonymous, that is of course no problem. Please just let me know in the Q&A section. And thanks again for being here. We really appreciate it.
Beautiful. Okay, thank you, Sonia. All right, Tom, here we go, buddy.
Here we go.
All right.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about multiple loss and ways to cope with it. And BJ and I take sort of a bigger view as to what multiple loss is. In the literature, most people say it's the death of your spouse and the death of your dear sister or best friend, multiple losses on top of one another. And of course, that's real. But we also take the opinion that multiple losses can be the loss of your husband and the death of your pet, maybe a miscarriage or even an abortion. And also just the aspect of changing a job, or growing older, losing some of the functional ability that you had when you were younger, no longer being able to run, or maybe no longer being able to walk. We view these things as losses that need to be grieved and experienced. And in the last years, I personally have become aware of the losses around the world, the existential fears of climate change, and in this country, the conflict and political upheaval. I think that these are even losses from the way the world was when we grew up. As at least certainly as an older person, that's real for me. So I view multiple losses as many different things that are just sort of changes from the way it was that we have to adapt to.
I love that, Tom. I think there's a lot of permission in there. I don't think loss or suffering, it doesn't lend itself to being weighed and compared. And loss on some level is loss. I'm so with you. And I'm also with you in this sort of current pickle of our time where you can be aware of loss at scale. As you were just saying a moment ago, I don't think that fact gets enough credence. And I think it probably has a lot to do with the mood that we're all walking around within and around. And, to your point, it's probably true that if we're paying attention, by some stretch, by some measure, we are all in some amount of grief all the time.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. And in fact, one of the things I said in the Blib intro is the longer we live, the more deep and varied our life is, the more richer it can become, but also the more loss. Mm-hmm. If you engage and live in your life, you are going to lose things. And so today's talk is different ways of possibly looking at that loss that could enrich us.
Right on. And what you've helped me understand, Tom, is that this isn't, it can be exponential. It's not just one loss plus one loss equals two losses. There's we'll see together here in a moment, but it's more complicated than that.
Okay, so to ground this talk, it's important that we understand the way bereavement theorists view the loss of one person. And William Warden has 4 progressive tasks, and you can read them through there, but it's to accept the reality of loss, experience the pain, adjust to the environment, and then withdraw emotional energy and reinvest it in another relationship. This is working bereavement theory, and this is what a therapist might help you do in the loss of your spouse or your best friend or your brother. For me, when I think of this, it brings up some issues around multiple loss. It's very difficult to be on the same progressive task if you have had multiple losses in your life. Mm-hmm. And so that really becomes confusing for us as to how to process the reality of one loss, but withdraw emotional energy from another loss. So I think it's just, this bereavement theory doesn't always work perfectly for the very real issue of multiple loss. And so BJ and I want to present different ways that you might approach.
Perfect. I mean, it makes a point. It's a helpful theory, but theory and reality aren't always quite a snug fit.
Yeah. And most people agree that there are essentially 2 phases to your mourning. And I know that many of you in the room today are experiencing loss now or have experienced loss. And so you may feel some connection to these 2 phases of mourning, because we all go through it as we approach and process our mourning. And I think these have value: denial, numbing, intrusive, repetitive. They speak for themselves, and you can probably think back and think, when I think of the loss that I'm processing, sometimes I'm just closed down. I can't touch my feelings. I'm numb. And other times you might be flooded with feeling and overwhelmed and feel just unable to carry on. These are not abnormal. We expect these in all of them. And as you can imagine, bereavement theory would imply different interventions based on your phase of mourning. And so if you're a friend of someone who's in bereavement and someone's numb, you might ask them, tell me about your loved one who died, as a way of re-engaging them in the experience of what they have lost. But if someone is sobbing to you and using drugs and alcohol to cope with their loss, maybe it's time to try to camp down on what they're experiencing and support them in a different way than bringing in emotions. I think that toward the end of this talk, we're going to have maybe a third intervention for mourning that we will get to that's a little different than both of these.
Beautiful. And I'm assuming, Tom, that in any one day, even sticking within this theory, one might cycle through numbness and intrusion and right.
Yeah, I think in any 1 hour. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I think that one day at a time thing is starting to feel more like 1 minute at a time. I mean, it's something really much more present, even than a day. Okay, well, shall I move us to the next one?
Yeah, go ahead, BJ. Thanks.
Okay.
So now I want to talk some about multiple loss and ask yourself, what's different in multiple loss? The obvious one comes up. More than one person has died. I have experienced more than one loss that is separate from one that I'm grieving. That's kind of obvious. But I would make the point that there are significant other circumstances around multiple loss that are different. The ones that I think of is that when you've had one death or one loss, that's in the past. Multiple losses appear unending. And I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but if you lose one thing and then another and then a third, it begins to feel like the world is shifting and you can't rely on anything. And so I think that multiple loss is not in the past. It is not something to be grieved over, but instead you're in it. It's in the present, not just the past. And I would make the point that it's not only in the present, you begin to feel like it's in the future too.
Oh, yeah.
And so these unending losses can really make a person question assumptions that they may have held all their life. And I don't just mean the religious ones, but those are often good ones. Oftentimes people who have suffered great loss do ask themselves why God is making them suffer, or how could this happen to me because I was a good person? And the point I want to make about this is that it really shakes up not only who we're with, but what we think. And we start to even question the meanings in our life. And that's why we're going to talk some about theorists who look at meanings in life in a few.
Right on, Tom. I just lots lighting up as you're talking, and I'm realizing is my version of that is I start feeling unlucky, like there's something intrinsically wrong with me. Like I can kind of buck up for one or two, but I start turning on myself and I start believing that some version of the world's out to get me or something like that. There's a piece of me that really, just to your point, it just undoes me. I suppose that's also the opportunity as you get sort of broken down under your assumptions. And I suppose this is the moment where there's some support that can lead to all sorts of realizations too.
Yes, it does, or it can. I also think that aspect, BJ, that we all go through where we ask ourselves, why me? Why is it happening? Is very real, and it's part of being human. And it is part of constructing what's meaningful in your life. So in a tragedy, people look and ask themselves, why is this happening to me? What does this mean to me? And that sort of construction is what we're going to talk about in a few minutes. I think it's just vital. Now, the last thing I want to say about multiple loss is I've been doing end of life work for almost 40 years, but two populations really taught me about multiple loss. The first is gay men in the 80s and 90s who were dying of AIDS and had lost their entire support system to AIDS. The second was what I've been doing for the last 16 years is caring for really, really old homebound elders. When you're at an advanced age, everything's going wrong. Your health, your spouse's health, friends are dying. And so multiple losses, these are populations that really taught me a lot about what people do and how we can cope.
It's an amazing history. And were you in the Bay Area this whole time, by the way, Tom?
Yeah, the Bay Area. I was at coming home hospice for 10 years during the worst of the AIDS epidemic. Yeah.
Oh boy, you have seen a thing or two. All right, shall I go to the next?
Let's move on.
Okay.
So I was talking some about meanings in life, and where we left is a million things happen and you start to wonder why when tragedy happens. And exploring your suffering can lead to a deeper understanding of why we are and what matters most to us. And in that exploration, there can be healing. You can find your truth. Friedrich Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Does that make sense?
With me, as does the converse too. That's a different subject, but but anyway, but yeah, that is a beautiful line. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about Viktor Frankl in a moment, so I'll leave that be. But I think he also ran with that ball too. So shall I move us along?
Yeah,
here?
let's move on, BJ, because it really does move straight into Viktor Frankl. So Viktor Frankl is one of the founders of existentialism, along with Sartre and Camus, but this guy was a practical applicant. But existentialism is what we're going to talk next about. And that's a philosophy that emphasizes essentially the meaninglessness of reality, but makes you responsible for the choices you make and the meaning that you give life.
So this is the language really sounds feeling important sometimes. And when I have conversations, it seemed to me a very important difference to say one finds meaning versus one makes meaning. I suppose we can get tedious in the word stuff, but I think there's some important differences. I don't think of one or the other. I mean, whether you believe in a grand meaning and our job is to find it, or there isn't some obvious meaning, or it's not fathomable and we have to create it or generate it if it flows through us. I kind of like to,
I think you're exactly right around finding and creating. To me personally, I resonate deeply with creating my own meaning from what is happening to me. There are many people who will turn to an organized religion or to a meditation style or structure that is meaningful to them. And I completely understand and support that. And it like whatever aligns you and comforts you is yay. But the aspect of creating your meaning is very powerful and is a tool to coping with your grief. So now we'll move on to Viktor.
And we'll circle back to this big point you just made too. There's plenty of time to talk about it.
I know BJ and I have talked about this, and I know that Viktor Frankl is very important to BJ and a lot of the work that he does. He's very important to me too. He's sort of the founder of existential psychotherapy or logotherapy, which isn't that great. But what this Viktor Frankl, for those of you who don't know, was an Austrian Jew. He was put in Auschwitz with his parents, his wife, and everyone perished. All of his family perished. He's the only survivor. He not only lost everyone who was his support system and the loves of his life, he also lost the manuscript that he was writing before he was sent to prison. And what Viktor Frankl experienced from that, he wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, which is a very popular book. I know that probably several of you have encountered it. He identifies that meaning in life is found in 3 different ways. The first is through your work. The second is through your love or connection to other people. And the third, and I think the most important when you're dealing with multiple losses, is the attitude that you take toward unavoidable suffering. And I find that very powerful, because no one can take the attitude that you take toward unavoidable suffering away from you. You can respond to your suffering in prison or in hell. That is your choice to give meaning to your suffering and to respond to it in a way that enriches you.
That's such a beautiful way into life. And as you're talking, Tom, I'm thinking about a lot of things. Like, one is, I hope my dad's listening. He brought us up to think a lot about attitude and thinking positively. And there's a lot to say about that and its relationship here, of what this idea of what you bring to the mix versus what the mix is. And this ability, this creative ability, this freedom to write our own story in a way. We're the author of it. We're the ones who spin that yarn. We're the ones who make the meaning, to your point.
To me, also, this difference in meaning in life is it's not overly optimistic. It's based on what's real, but responding to it how you choose. So I'm not asking you to say everything's hunky-dory. We all know everything isn't hunky-dory. But responding to the suffering in your life in a classy way or a way that enriches you is an opportunity that you have.
I think
Dostoevsky, the author, he said, "There is only one thing that I dread, and that is not to be worthy of my suffering."
That's a hell of a line.
Yeah.
And you're helping me really also, and the contrast sort of to positivism. You're not necessarily spinning it in any direction. And I suppose it's also really important to call the difference between one's emotional response. I'm not sure I have control or even want to try to control my emotions. Plastering a smile on my face when I'm unhappy, that I don't think is helpful. But there's a difference between our emotional response and our narrative response, or the script rewrite with things. That is very much in our control. And that, I think, is different than trying to control our emotions. And I think I found that to be a really important distinction, because otherwise I think people walk around feeling like they're supposed to force happiness, or if they only tried harder, they could ram themselves into some emotional state. And I personally don't know that that's very helpful.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because our next slides are going to talk about elevating emotions, but what I perceive to be in a more sincere way than what you're discussing. And I think you make an excellent point that in no part of this presentation am I saying, don't feel your pain, don't, go into your grief, experience it, feel it. That is one way to move through it and heal it. But what we're trying to do here is give different ways of looking at your pain and richer, fuller ways that might allow you to approach your suffering.
Right on.
Hence the next slide.
Right on.
Verena Kast is a Swiss psychoanalyst who is essentially Jungian, and she's still with us today, and she's still writing. But I found a book that she wrote called Joy, Inspiration, and Hope to have direct application to the multiple losses that I was experiencing in the late 1980s. And basically, her comments are that inspiration is the opposite of expiration. and that we have to feel our wounds. We have to go into what we are suffering and experience that. But her point is, we also have to take deep delight in the depth of other feelings too. We have to tap into our joy and our hopes. And so she's saying, by only staying focused on the sad emotions, you are looking at half of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go back to the beginning of the talk, when we're talking about the two phases of bereavement, of denial and numbing or overwhelm, I wonder if there's an opportunity to do not denial and not, not closing down the overwhelm, but instead shifting the depth of feeling to the elevating emotions.
I think it's such a beautiful and such an important notion, whatever the right word is there, Tom. I think especially for those of us who work, or maybe, I don't know if especially, but palliative care, our own field in some ways. I watch our language, I watch the structure of it, and it's a healthcare structure in general too, that, something goes wrong in your life and that's when you engage healthcare. It's rarely about optimization. It's maybe about making things less, like I like to say, less shitty. Like our job is to help people suffer less or make things less horrible. Yeah, okay, fair enough. But that, even if you're sticking with that mission, to do so means, seeking ballast with other emotions, some dynamism, some interplay between positive and negatives.
One of the things that really stuck with me was when Dr. Cast said, transformation is possible not only when we endure our deepest anxieties and fathom the depths of our despair, but also when we experience the full range of our joy.
Mm-hmm.
And so if what we're trying to do is heal, maybe we can do it through our suffering, but maybe also there's a part in our joy.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to the next slide.
Yeah. I find like what you're just saying here and her work and your description of it it's very exciting to think. This all doesn't have to hurt. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's not decadent to feel your joy. It's actually like, it's really important. Like, please feel your joy.
So true, BJ. And too often therapy, a friend sitting down with another friend is hand holding and suffering together. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm all for it. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying there may be a balance in our life that would allow us to more fully experience who we are.
Amen.
And transform.
Amen. I think this is what we mean when we say things like have a full life. It's not necessarily packed with action. I think it's packed with an array of feelings in life more than anything else. Okay, well, all right, let's move us along. You're right on. It's so beautiful.
So she has a specific task, Dr. Verena Cast, called an autobiography of joy. It's very simple. Anyone can do it. Go back to a moment in your life when you were joyful. In the depths of your despair, go back to a moment in your life when you were joyful. Were you 3 years old and riding on a trike? Were you 7 years old and coming down to Christmas? Mm-hmm. Were you at your wedding day, the birth of your child? What was a moment that was full of joy in your life? Mm-hmm. And really delve into it. Who was there? What did it feel like? What did you do? How long did it last? What were the other emotions? Where were you? Really recreate that moment of joy. That does two things. The first is it actually gives you a moment of joy. Mm-hmm. You actually, in the depths of your sorrow, can feel that moment of unrestrained, joyful happiness. Mm-hmm. So you can start training your body to remember that you are more than your grief.
Mm-hmm. I think, this is like a public health announcement. I mean, I honestly think like, I love to think this thought, like when happiness is a choice, when joy is a choice, choose it. Yeah. There's going to be plenty of times where you just can't. But oh my Lord, what a beautiful invitation you're giving us, Tom.
I hope also that some of it resonates with existential therapy, which is a rather dark topic when we think about creating our own life. But and I hope that people can see this is different than just putting on a smiley face and faking it. We're actually re-experiencing the feeling.
Right on. And is
Okay.
I will just to say, I mean, yes, there's a darkness to sort of existentialism. It can be a heaviness, but to your point, I don't think there has to be, or it's not
Right.
just heavy. It's we're trying to approach reality here, and it turns out reality includes joy too, and other things.
Absolutely true.
And
Yeah,
that
we're trying to round it out so it's a full spectrum of living.
exactly.
Okay.
And this also gets at the creative enterprise of once you engage the sort of, okay, it can be heavy to have the burden of making your life, making meaning. It can feel like it is something of a responsibility, you might say. And it's also a great freedom. In other words, you
Yes.
get to write your script to such an extent, not of what happens to you, but how you respond to life. So
How you respond to life is also not outside of yourself. It's not your health. It's not the people in your life. It's in here, and no one can take that.
Mhm. All right, I'm getting chills over here, Tom. Okay.
Okay, so I put this slide in because I want to acknowledge that there's got to be someone who's watching this that's thinking, oh, come on.
Mhm.
I cannot create my meaning. I cannot feel the elevated emotions. I'm a mess. I can't feel joy. I get that. Of
Mhm.
course, there are times I can't either. All of us are like that. That's okay.
Mhm.
Be in your grief, be in your pain. But I would make the point that even in the depths of your sorrow, you can experience a quiet joy.
Mhm.
Maybe the bud of a flower, or the warmth of sun on your skin, or eye contact with the love of your life.
Mhm.
So nurture the quiet joys and also reach out to our inner freedoms, which is the experience of art,
Mhm.
of music, of philosophy, you know, the inner things, your experience of the richness of life. Reach for those in times when you can't find anything else.
Mhm. You know, one of my favorites, one of my favorite quiet joys is for lack of I'm not sure there is a word, but the absence of pain. Like there's a halo sometimes when I'm dealing with pain, physical or emotional, where it tapers, and I know you notice its absence for a moment, and what feels like this blissful kind of neutrality of there's no contrast between myself and the world around me for a moment. So anyway, I just love to call people, especially people dealing with chronic pain, calling out the absence of pain as a place, not a negative, but a place itself. Anyway,
I think that's a super wise comment, because a lot of what this talk is asking people to do is stretch outside of their own experience and or broaden what that experience is. But of course, if you're really in physical pain or emotional pain, that's hard. And so that's what this slide is saying, and that's what you have said so well just then, BJ.
All right, brother, shall we?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so Greta Thunberg said no more blah, blah, blah. And the point of that is, in my experience, people who have dealt with many losses in their life run out of their capacity to deal with bullshit. They live a more authentic life that is more true to who they are. They're more aligned to their being. And I would make the point that that's a form of healing.
Amen. And it's also a form of healing that can be a little contagious. It's just like happiness can be. But that cut to the truth thing that you're describing, which there's a reverence when I bump into it. Sometimes I can be the source of it, more often I'm learning that one from others, and woo, it feels like jarring, but really good. It's like a really good shock to the system.
Mhm.
Okay, shall we move
It's
on?
very liberating, I think, isn't it? It's very liberating sometimes when you've
Oh, yeah.
suffered so much, what becomes authentically you and your experience of the world is just richer. And
Mhm.
so one of the points of that is all of this terrible trauma and loss in your life has changed who you are and deepened who you are. And you might have an increased capacity to love your life.
Mhm. Amen. That's like the flood of loss and pain comes through, and boy, it hurts, but it also clears. So if you let it, it can just clear so much space.
Yep.
And it's a painful process, but ooh, that spaciousness feels really good. And that no bullshit place is like, in other words, you're in step, you're in tune with reality. You're good and bad. You don't have to color it to make it tolerable. You don't have to spin it in any way. It's that rich capacity. I'm not sure that you get to that capacity unless you're a child or unless you kind of dealt with your losses. But this is one of those things I thank loss for cleaning me out in a way,
Yep. Absolutely.
Oh, this is a good
All
one.
right. Shakespeare made an excellent point. We defy augury. There's special providence in the fall of the sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all.
Mhm.
Point being, loss after loss will come. Joy after joy will come. Live your life authentically and honestly and openly in the world. And Shakespeare knew that hundreds of years ago.
So maybe some of the themes we're talking about here are pretty old. In other words, maybe everything that we're going through now is a variation on a theme that humans have ever dealt with. This weird idea of there's the world you want and there's the world you have, and they don't always look alike, and you have to have some way to trim the sails between the two. Oh man, yeah. Well, this is beautiful. And also I love this quote too, Tom, because to your point of if you can kind of keep up with your losses in this way, you'll be ready for that next joy. You won't miss it in a way. I wonder how often I'm 2 steps behind myself, and how often I miss moments. Probably a lot.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that's
Yeah. Of course we all do, and I suppose it's like kind of a life's work to keep up to speed with yourself so that you don't miss such moments. I think that's a nice way to think about aging. All
okay.
right, shall we?
Yep. The last slide, it's not the exact last slide, but I want to recap some of the things you can do that might be new to you when trying to heal from multiple losses. When you're overwhelmed, divert attention, but also maybe there's that opportunity not just to divert, but to focus on joyful, elevating emotions. Reconnect with what's inside you, your experience to nature and art and poetry and music, and explore what gives your life meaning. And that meaning can change in your life. What was the reason that you were living, the meaning in your life when you were raising your children may be different than the meaning in your life when you're caring for your declining spouse. And so look at these things and just find meaning in your life, because meaning can give you increased capacity to cope.
Yeah, and that ability to make it, to create it, to make a quilt of life scraps or whatever. However, pick a metaphor or something.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad that you put this one slide together, because this stuff can get real heady and philosophical and gorgeous. But thank you very much for bringing us back to some sort of very practical steps, things we can all do in our day.
Yep.
It's really helpful, brother.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I think we have one more slide and then
Okay.
references. So because I feel like we should open up to
Yeah,
questions.
we should get to questions. You are right. Yes.
Rilke just said it beautifully, and more or less I'll paraphrase, if you don't live your life fully, you're not going to really take in the unutterable abundance and power of our existence.
Mhm.
And this slide is showing nature, connectedness to humanity, work, activities, play, etc.
Mhm.
Next slide.
Well, let's that there's no way to up that. Oh yeah, I love this slide, right?
I love this slide because it's an African-American woman, it's Billie Holiday, singing kind of on a brick wall of most likely a prison. And she's singing that life is beautiful. And I think that this does encapsulate an approach to our losses, which can be very healing.
Literally, figuratively, and always singing into the pain
Yeah.
in some way, All right. Well,
Those are just references which people can probably get if they
Yeah.
want them when we post the slides. So
yeah, exactly. So let me pull us out of here. Thank you, Tom. That was awesome. I just
Well,
love hearing you talk. It's
thank
beautiful.
you for doing that with me, BJ. I really appreciate.
That's my pleasure. Okay, so yeah, any comments, questions?
Yeah, we've got quite a few. And I will say ditto to BJ's comment, Tom. That was really, really awesome. We have one hand up, so we can just start over there. Sarah, 1 second. I will unmute you. And you might have to unmute yourself on your end. There you are.
Am I here?
You are.
Okay, great. I've got a question. It's kind of a practical question. I really am appreciative of all this practical advice, which, some of it we sort of innately know, but are prone to forget when we get in these very difficult circumstances. So my question is, how should I be talking to myself when I get into that space of multiple loss, when I just feel like life is unbearable and or the quality of my life is just untenable? It's just unacceptable at this moment. What are the things I should be saying to myself at that moment?
Well, thanks, Sarah. And I think that's really going to vary from person to person and moment to moment, meaning episode to episode. You might, bereavement theory would say, oh, if you're really down and you're not connected, talk it through. If you're feeling overwhelmed, divert. Possibly there's an opportunity to do some of the exercises that we talked about around recreating an autobiography of joy, trying to find a moment that's healing to you, because it's a way of moving forward and healing, but not just diverting. I find that if I've at a loss for words and not sure where to go, that I find I can sometimes connect through music. So I often tell people to develop a playlist of songs that are healing to them. And that can sometimes sort of connect you or put you in touch with more than just your suffering.
Sarah, can I add something to Tom's?
Sure.
comment?
Yeah, sure.
Your question really resonates with me. And one thing I think I'm getting actually a little bit better at is I watch when I feel a certain way. I've gotten a lot better at watching my brain swoop in and really quickly try to fashion a narrative. Like, what is this about? What's the story here? And I do it as we've been talking today. That's a real important step to take, and to take it thoughtfully. I do it in this sort of spastic sense when I'm in those throes of sort of starting to hate myself or wonder if I'm flawed or whatever. And very quickly these stories set up, and then I'm left with this story to respond to. So my whole comment here is to say, when the world is meeting your description a moment ago, if you can just pause, you can just wait before you layer in the meanings, the stories, the narratives, and just settle and be in that moment. Because otherwise you might talk yourself into things like, well, it's never going to be any way else. The world is whatever. I know I can do that. So I don't know if that's helpful, Sarah, but
Yeah.
that's the bottom line here, is pause before the story's set up.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for your question.
Mhm.
Thank you, Sarah. 1 second here. Okay, we had a few more questions come in. This person said, I find oftentimes I listen to friends with issues around loss and bereavement, and to show my empathy, I share my experience, but it sounds like a competition over who has a worse situation. Is it best to leave your personal situation out of the discussion?
Mm-hmm. Honest, real quick response to that. That one resonates with me. I do that a lot, and I catch myself doing it a lot, and I just end up accidentally kind of sounding like I'm one-upping someone. And all I mean to say is, oh, I so hear you. I have a corollary in my life. I extra feel you, but it doesn't come out of my mouth that way. So with that set up, Tom, what should we do?
Hey, I'm there too. I agree. And I think that's part of just connecting to someone's suffering is feeling it resonate within yourself. So I think you have to generally, if you're really feeling like I'm going to be there for this person, I would make some effort to focus on their experience. But sometimes that will require that you tell your story so that the empathy is there. So I'm sorry, I don't think I have the exact right answer for that. I think I've goofed it about as often as I've succeeded.
Yeah, that's all of this, right? A work in progress. But yeah, I think if we'll agree to share, if we find some magical answer to that good question, we shall. But there is some real judgment that happens of when to speak, when to shut up, when to listen, when to offer an anecdote. I think is maybe over time we'll also gain the sort of better judgment of when we face another person's pain, that we'll feel our way into what they need in that moment, because I don't think there's a pat answer.
But I do think possibly some of the thoughts in this talk give you an avenue beyond here's what I'm suffering from and how it resonates with your suffering. Maybe it's an opportunity to talk about, well, what does your life mean to you now? How did this affect you? Or tell me about a time that you were really joyful, because we could both use that right now. Maybe there's opportunities to kind of shift it away from, the heaviness that both of you might be feeling.
And I think there's also kind of a generalized two-step thing here, which is one is like, let's feel the feelings first before we again, put that narrative around it. And that's, I think, good advice for ourselves. Also good that we don't project narratives onto each other, because then we're kind of stuck with someone else's story too. Anyway, then maybe there's something into the timing of it. And if you sense that the person across from you just needs to unspool and be heard, maybe there's no word at all. Maybe it's just a hand on their shoulder or sitting in silence and let that volcano spill before we start trying to clean it up or find some, like I say, story. But all right. Who else is out there?
Yeah, we've got quite a few hands up. Chuck, I will unmute you here. And you might have to unmute yourself on your end. Let's give it a second.
I'm here.
Oh,
can you
there
hear
you
me?
are. Yep, we can.
Excellent. This is a great moment, meeting BJ for the first time, even if it's only on video, because I've seen your tech talk and other works of yours, communication works. I'm Carlos Varela from Mexico City. I'm 51 years old. Tom, it's great to meet you too, and it must be such an interesting knowing your experience back in the 80s and 90s. If you have a book, please let us know, because I'd love to read about that experience. What I was going to say is two things. The first one is, I believe from your presentation, the best part is the list you put there, because you just gave me the best insight I could get. It's not about one solution. It's the way you can channel your grief has to do with your temperament, your talents, and your own experience. So you need a menu of options. Why am I saying this? Because when I read the word activism, turning my grief to activism, it was at the end of one of the sentences. Yes. I said, wow, that's mine. That's mine. That would be my way of handling grief. I didn't get to read the whole list because you went through the list too fast. But I think that is very important because that list can answer the way we can cope with grief and the way we can help others cope with grief. We need a set of options because each person has a temperament and experience and talents, and they will engage once you give them that option in the menu, like you guys just did to me. I saw activism and I can imagine myself pouring in that, like honoring the person with my activism. You see, it's like giving something. And the second part is telling you about one of my experiences because it really connects to what you're saying very quickly. I had a psychologist, but she was also a friend of our family. And she was a wonderful person. She was like the perfect life. She had great kids, great grandkids, a great life. She was an artist too. I was amazed of how many things were right with her life. And one day I called her some time ago after our therapy time. And I called her and I said, I have this problem and I'm grieving and what should I do? And she said, you know, you should embrace the impermanence of things. And I stopped there and that's it. But then 4 months later, my mother came to me like very nervous and she said, I have to tell you something. And I have to tell you that she died 3 weeks ago. And I cried. And I remember that and then I found out that she was telling me about the impermanence of things when she knew she had been diagnosed with cancer. Now, the part that I want to share with whoever is listening here is that I didn't have closure, meaning I didn't have my ritual of closure and I needed the ritual. So what I did is I tapped into her sister and I said, you know, I need closure. Can I go and see you and talk to you? And what I did is, she said yes. That was 2 months later. She said yes. I dressed in black. I went to her house. I bought some flowers like I was going to a funeral. I brought them in her house and I came there and I can't believe we had such a wonderful 4-hour talk about their lives. And then I went to church. I'm an agnostic, by the way, but I went to church. I knelt for the whole time because I thought that would connect me to a ritual, and that was it. You know, I made those 2 acts for myself. I found a way for closure. So I just wanted to say that, and thank you guys for this. I was hoping it was 2 or 3 hours, but it's a short talk, and I hope you do more of this. Thank you.
Carlos, that was beautiful. It's very nice to meet you, buddy. Welcome to this place.
Thank you.
You again.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That's beautiful. And I think you're this notion of activism and moving into action and actualizing. It's a kind of an alchemy, and it's a way to move with life, and it moves through you. You are participating in it. And I'm really glad you point us back to mourning, essentially, the rituals, the things we can do, and how you can sort of, if sublimate's a good word, or pour those feelings into something, into an act. That time with your friend's sister would never have happened, right, if it hadn't been for that loss. So anyway, thank you very much for your comments. I really appreciate it, Carlos.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Tom, anything from you, buddy? Shall we?
Well, the one thing just to say about that is the comment around activism stemmed directly from AIDS patients, and everyone was dying around them. And in San Francisco, we channeled our power into activism and ended up changing some of the way healthcare is delivered. And that gave meaning to a lot of people whose life were multiply bereaved. It gave them something to do and something to believe in and be proud of. So I do really think activism can really be healing.
And what a wonderful legacy too, right? The world was one way, these hard things happened, and the world changed. The world reacted thanks to your activism. It's so participatory, it's so visceral. Anyway, great guys. Okay. Sones, what else we got?
Yeah. So just a quick check for you, Tom. Are you okay to go a few minutes over? We've got some hands
Sure.
up. Another question.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. So this person said, this is a little bit of a story here. They had a brother's friend killed himself, and this was a few months after the brother's wife had died of cancer. Another cousin killed herself. Then another family member had an accident. So they're just kind of in the midst of a lot of grief. And she's wondering, how might it be meaningful or not meaningful?
A suicide or sudden death, but particularly suicide, is a very complicated bereavement. And when you add two together, it's compounded. As we said earlier, multiple losses sometimes really become more than just two losses. So that's really difficult. And much like Carlos was talking earlier, when you don't have the ability to process things before they occur, you are also in an episode of complex or complicated grief. So all of this is really tough. Those are kind of darker things where people are suicided and there's a lot of loss that this person is dealing with. And I'm sorry for that. I know that's a hard place to be. I guess I can say that processing that ritual can be meaningful, like what Carlos was saying. Perhaps this person can construct a ritual for themselves where there's a leave taking or a goodbye, where they write a letter to the person who's gone or find other ways that are meaningful for them to have some closure with that. Those are some things that can be helpful.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, that like we sort of a subtext of the comments today, Tom, of so much of what you're saying is loss begets this sort of this raw, very raw material from which you create and make meaning and make life from in this way. You know, there's so what you're describing, I'm not sure we got your name. I'm sorry if I missed it, but what you're describing is complicated and just a ton of raw material. And therefore you can imagine it's going to take a while to kind of to work from this, to move so much pain. And suicide, of course, is importantly different. And this, Tom, to your point about a complicated bereavement, that's a descriptive phrase, but it's also something of a diagnosis. And it was very likely to imagine the person you're describing would very much benefit from some support outside of themselves, very much perhaps a support group or a professional of some kind, psychotherapist, etc. It's we don't do any of this alone, but just friends and family may not be able to get all the way there. This may need some professional support.
Absolutely.
All right, one sec. We've got a few more hands up. Darcy, I'm gonna unmute you here.
All right. Hi, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to start out saying thank you so much. I'm so honored to be in this space and so grateful to hear all your thoughts on this so far. And my question, it stems from a conversation I had with a friend. Actually, yesterday, we were talking about frequency to loss and how once you get hit with so many losses at once, it could feel like you need to be in the space of need to survive, need to predict the next thing coming. And all of that attention, once you get in a space that is at least safer or in a different space where you can kind of revisit what happened, there is a grief to that self that was suffering and was not able to feel that depth of emotion, that fullness of emotion that we were discussing before. Mm. So I was wondering if you just had any comments on that process of revisiting a grief in a space that you weren't able to feel nurtured by yourself.
Well,
the question is, an event, a loss occurred, and you weren't in a place where you could fully embrace it or grieve it. And how do we come back to that? Is that what you're asking, Darcy?
Yeah, how do we revisit that in a space where we feel able to more explore those emotions that were kind of shut down before?
do you mean, Darcy, like how to summon the feelings, how to kind of invite revisiting the grief?
Yes, inviting it back, and just getting kind of a new view of yourself in a new space outside of that time.
Okay, so I think I understand that question, and it goes back to those phases of bereavement, I think, where sometimes it's numbing and sometimes it's overwhelm. I made the point, I don't think it's just those two, but if you're having trouble connecting and feeling like it's a safe place to do that, I think there are a couple things of value. The first is remembering the loss. So thinking the person that you've lost and remembering your relationship together. Another thing, so that you can kind of get into the feeling of that. But the other thing that I think, which I didn't have time to talk about, is something that David Rand talked about, is a timeline of loss. You can literally go back and write down in your life your timeline of loss. And there can be value in that, in recognizing all that you've lost. I think it's a nice corollary to the autobiography of joy. But you can start to enumerate, here's my losses. Well, no wonder I feel closed down. I've lost 17 things in the last 4 years. So it's a way of sort of, once again, re-engaging the emotions. Is that at all helpful?
It is, thank you.
Darcy, and just you bring up a lot of good things here. Maybe I can jump in too. One is to say that, just to point out, this stuff is not linear. And in some ways, like I have talked a lot about the loss of my sister in this setting. And it took years before I could even really feel much. I was really shut down for years. And so in some ways it felt like grief was delayed until, and maybe my body, maybe my mind was protecting me until I was ready, So one is to say, and
Yeah.
what was important for me at that moment was to not get down on myself. Like, what's wrong with me? I didn't feel this back then. Like, what a jerk. What, didn't you care? Or whatever. Watching these sort of critical narratives come in, it was really important to really let those come and really let them go. And just to say, I wasn't ready, and there's no shame in that. So I don't know if that comment is in your question, Darcy. Another thing that may be buried maybe in your question is more like Tom was saying, like summoning. You're trying to reawaken it when you're finally safe and in a safe place to do it. Physical objects, like I have my sister's sweater that she was last wore. Things like this can be reminders, visceral reminders to re-engage your nervous system if it's long been quiet or numbed. And also on that point too, some of the feelings after time can be actually pretty subtle. So part of that, going to that safe place and re-inviting this experience, is to really tune in on a subtle plane. I think early grief can be really bombastic, but some of this stuff, especially over time, gets really quiet, and it takes a minute, for at least for me, to notice it.
I think all of that's super wise. And I think that you're absolutely right. And some of this in the question is, maybe there's nothing wrong with where you are right now with your grief. Maybe next year or next week, it will present itself to you. And maybe you don't need to do any summoning. Mm-hmm. I would say perhaps a measure of that is, how rich is your life? How connected are you to people? If you feel like something like the numbness has somehow closed you down from other stuff, that may be an indication that maybe it's time to work it. But maybe if you're okay, it's okay. Just let it be, because the healing will occur in an organic way.
Amen.
Thank
amen.
you so much.
Thank you, Darcy.
Okay, we've got a few more questions here. This person said, how does grief after choosing the right to die compare with grief after suicide? My brother used the end of life option after dealing with ALS. I have grieved his death, but was surprised to learn recently that I hadn't fully grieved his life.
I think that, who was that speaking, Sonia?
I've forgotten the person. Sorry,
Okay.
Tom.
Well, I guess my point or my thought is that whoever was saying that is far wiser than me. around the difference of dealing with someone who's chosen their death and through the act, and someone who has suicided. I think people choosing their death and doing it in a conscious way, there is the opportunity at least for some processing and healing before the event, which I would hope would be meaningful. It sounds like that person is saying there were layers of that grief or that loss, and now they're experiencing yet another layer. And I would say, just bring it on. This is real. I hope that the experience of the brother choosing to end life was positive for them and enabled some sort of healing prior.
Yeah, I think there is something about this act of choose. We always kind of talk about death as it's this thing that comes and grabs us, and we never want it to happen. But that's just not true. So part of what your question also just makes me want to invite for all of us a more nuanced relationship with death. And there are probably times for all of us in our lives where we'd welcome it, right this instant. And also trying to do the work of sort of taking the shame out of that. And I do think there are, of course, meaningful differences any one situation to another, but sort of structurally, choosing one's death within the context of he's dying soon either way, and this is a meaningful response, it gives us time to kind of prepare and talk it out. That does feel importantly different from someone who more spontaneously suicides. And some of the difference is semantic, plenty of it isn't. But either way, no matter how you slice it, it's going to be pointing you back to you, whatever you're feeling, whatever these structural elements, those are kind of interesting, but your feelings are your feelings, period, end of story.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that is everyone, looks like. There are a few questions that I'm thinking of for people who have written them in that we didn't address that I will get to you over email because I want to make sure we get them. So just a quick shout out. If we have not answered your question, I'll check in with you. But yeah, thank you so much, Tom. That was really, really awesome. So thank you. And thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you everyone for being here. And thank you, BJ, for doing this with me. It was a great honor. And I hope that some of the information is meaningful and use it as you will.
Sure was, buddy. Thank you so much. That was just fun, as well as many other adjectives. So thank you very, very much, buddy. And thank you, everybody out there. It's great to have you. We'll see you next time.
Happy weekend, everyone.
Bye.